7, an increase in the deferment of employees' tax. 8, an increase in the turnover threshold for automatic deferrals. 9, we have been particularly pleased to see how quickly the nation has pulled together. A solidarity fund has been set up and has shown us a new way of doing things, quicker, faster, and reliable. Already, the Solidarity Fund has spent over R1 billion on the key protective equipment in the health system, but are also intervening in providing additional social relief. And I'm very pleased to say that there are a number of South African professionals who have donated their time to work with the Solidarity Fund. 10, and finally, we have expanded access to living annuity funds by allowing individuals to adjust the proportion they receive as annuity income instead of waiting up to 1 year until their next contract anniversary date. The combined effect of these revenue and expenditure measures have naturally changed the fiscal framework. That said, for the next couple of weeks, many of these measures can still be accommodated within the current framework. I will shortly be tabling a revised budget bill before Parliament to deal with all of these measures. We are in this together. As we know, South Africa is resilient, and we have the ability to get through tough times together. We are not the only ones who have been affected by the virus. Global economic growth is expected to be reduced quite substantially during 2020 and rebound in 2021. Our economy as well is going to follow a similar path. And we're quite confident that if we continue with our structural reforms, we'll be able to come back to a sustained growth trajectory. With these few words, Minister Mthembu, I would like to say that we remain ready and committed to do whatever it takes to get our country going forward, to support our firms and businesses, to support the old, the infirm, and those without any incomes, so that we can show solidarity amongst ourselves for the benefit of our people and our society. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. And indeed, this is the sentiment that has been shown by the whole of government, your last words, that we are all here to do whatever it takes to show solidarity and stand with all our people during these difficult times. Now, a statement has now been read by the Minister of Finance, detailing all those measures, again repeating all those measures, and also giving further clarity on all those measures that the President spoke to, and indeed the work that the Reserve Bank is playing in this regard, equally the work that our Treasury is playing in this regard. Having said that, we will now open for questions. Whilst we are waiting for questions, let's just indicate that apart from this press briefing, we will have another press briefing tomorrow at 10, easing the lockdown up to the 1st of, or the lockdown which will continue until the 1st of May. But apart from that, we will then also have other ministers that will further explain from their angle how these monies that the minister and the president has spoken to will then get to the necessary recipients. That will happen next week. Tomorrow, we will be downloading and putting in the public the risk-adjusted approach for easing in business and economy into our country after the lockdown. Can we now take questions from those that would like to ask the minister's team questions? Do we have? Yes. Yep. We have number one. You can speak.
Minister, the first caller is Carol from President.
Carol, we can hear you. You can steam ahead.
Hi, Minister. How are you all? Well, I hope I received that. Mr. Mboweni, how are you going to fund the fiscal package? Are you going, and how much money do you intend to raise from international finance institutions? In particular, you've said, you would approach the World Bank with their special facilities. And then the second thing around that is the National Development, the New Development Bank, and whether you would be going for a bigger amount than just the 1 billion, which all members have been entitled to, or whether you'd go for more than that. Thanks very much.
Very much. If we may request that those who are asking questions, if they can from their televisions or radios, because it gives this echo where we can't even hear properly what their questions are. Any other question that we have now? Yeah, from our WhatsApp team.
Thank you, Minister. The first question is from Hajra from Power FM. She's asking that she says, Minister, the President said this week the country and the world will never be the same. He added that we do not want to return to the pre-COVID-19 economy but forge a new economy. The question is, how are we going to do this? The second question is from Debo Hotswane from MoneyWeb, and his question is requesting for clarity on the increases in social grants. Are these increases going to be per caregiver in this instance, or will it be per child? And the third question is from Ed from the Business Maverick, and he's asking, are the loans available to you, such as those from the IMF, at low rates enough to make your debt burden more sustainable?
So those are the questions we have at the moment. Without any further ado, again, I will go back to you, Minister, and your team.
Thank you very much, Carol, Peyton, Business Day. How are these initiatives going to be funded? Firstly, budget reallocations or reprioritizations. We are going all out to remove from the budget all items which can be postponed. All programs which can be postponed are being postponed, and we're redirecting money to this initiative now. So that's the first thing. And it's clear, for example, that there are certain activities which, under the normal course of events, would have taken place. Take around tourism, for example. But it is very clear that for the next while, there's not much tourism that's going to take place, or tourism activities. So it doesn't make sense to continue keeping the budget items for tourism in a situation where tourism is not taking place. Doesn't make sense. So we're having to trim off quite a number of funds from government departments and removing some of the whistles and bells which have been there in the system. That's the first thing. Secondly, we are saying that the private sector, in conversation with the National Treasury and the South African Reserve Bank, have come to the conclusion that we can unlock between 100 to 200 billion rand through the National Guarantee Scheme, National Credit Guarantee Scheme. Now that scheme will function in particular to favor those businesses which are 300 million rand or less in turnover. That's very important because it doesn't mean that these are funds in the hands of the fiscus, but this will be funding in the economic system, which should help to keep oiling the functioning of the economic system. That's very important, so that we are not very statist in our approach, but we bring together the private and the public sector. Now, so the profits and losses on that guarantee scheme, yes, will revert back to the National Revenue Fund. But we have to take a positive approach and not think only about losses, but let's think about benefits which are going to accrue to the economy. That's the second part of the answer to your question. The third part of the answer is, through these additional tax measures, which I've made reference to, additional funding is going to be unlocked into the economy, which again should help in oiling the economy to function. Tax relief means more money in people's pockets. And when people have got more money in their pockets, they're able to spend, to buy the chickens from, Mboweni brothers, to buy the green chili, And when they buy the green chili and the chickens from Mr. Mboweni, it means Mr. Mboweni is able as well to go and buy bread. That supports the bakery, and it gets the wheels of the economy moving. And we also said that there will be VAT refunds, which will be speeded up. Deferrals in tax measures also announced. In addition to that, Minister Mtembu, and this is very important, the banking sector has announced a set of measures which should support their clients in the banking system. For example, postponing some of the mortgage requirements, or even car repayments and so on. That's very important. Home loans and so on. Very important for people to understand. Not all of this is going to come from the fiscus, but it's in the economic system. So we need to think beyond just the role of the state alone, but the state in working with the private banks and the financial system to help funds to be available in the economy to keep moving. That's how the interrelatedness of these economic variables is important to drive the economy forward. So one should look at the package in its piece. And myself have also agreed that the insurance companies will also put in place a set of measures that will allow policyholders not to be disadvantaged by this situation. Meaning that post the crisis, no insurance company, for example, can say, you did not pay your premiums for the past 2 months, therefore your policy has lapsed. No, that policy is going to be picked up. Again, it's not just the government putting money as such, but the government in conversation with industry, putting a package of measures which will eventually assist the consumer in the South African market. Finally, the issue that seems to be coming top of the pops is whether you're going to approach the IMF, the World Bank, those horrible people in Washington who carry with them stones which they use to break people's bones if you don't payback and so on. I think, to be honest, with IMF and the World Bank have put facilities to support countries which are being affected by this to apply for up to 4.2 billion. South Africa is entitled to apply for up to 4.2 billion US dollars in response to this crisis. Now, of course, DG Dondo is in conversation all the time with the IMF and the World Bank people. At the World Bank, it seems for now, we could negotiate for a facility of up to maybe between 55 and 60 million dollars. Very small, but we'll negotiate as much as we can in this regard. The critical thing about the IMF facility that we would approach them for is that it is specific to the crisis. This is not the usual budget support or policy intervention or technical assistance and conditionalities and things like that. And I think we need to just understand that, as the President says, we're in a warlike situation, and all people need to go to the front to deal with this situation. The New Development Bank, otherwise popularly known as the BRICS Bank, has set aside $1 billion US dollars, which we are entitled to apply for. And without doubt, I think DG Dondo will be following on from the request for, what is it called? Request for, yeah, is a request for funding that he has put across to the New Development Bank, and we're following up on that without a doubt. It's also our bank. We are members of that institution. We pay our subscriptions, and therefore we're entitled to apply. The next issue is the President spoke about us forging a new economy, quite correctly. It is possible that after the lockdown has been lifted, a number of companies might be unable to rise from the ashes. Therefore, without a doubt, since nature knows no vacuum, other economic players will come into the picture. And you'll see new companies forged between the dying old and the emerging new, and so on. And one of the things which is uppermost in my mind every day is how can we take full advantage of this crisis to take those young people who are not in education, not in employment, not in training, and bring them into economic activity. So the certain things that we used to do before, which we have let go, special employment programs, for example, just the fencing of along the highways and the roads to avoid the donkeys and cattle crossing and killing people. That needs to be resuscitated. The fire breaks throughout the country to avoid felt fires going all over the place. Strategic thinking about expanding, for example, thinking about bringing together private sector participation in the management of that harbor, very important, to be different configuration. Minister Gordhan spoke about starting a new airline altogether from the ashes of South African Airways. So it's a new economy altogether. The possibility, and it's a real possibility, that we form a national agriculture board, which will, amongst others, identify all these underutilized farms around the country and allocate them to specific farmers who want to farm and direct and educate them on how to farm. Totally new situation. The construction of new residential areas in Mudimule or Mokopong, where instead of continuing with the sprawl, we now begin to build habitats of reasonable blocks of flats with shops downstairs and laundry facilities and so on. Redesigning our towns and villages. Identify the new mining opportunities which are there, and so on and so forth. That could go on and on. But one thing that's for certain, our manufacturing sector has to look very closely at the production of those commodities and goods which we had let go for many years and relying almost solely on China. And yet we can produce those things here at home. So you'll see the emergence of new manufacturing capacity. I could go on and on about this. That I think also answers the question of the loans, and I could go on and on about this. That I think also answers the question of the loans and the debt burden. I think I've dealt with that. To avoid any confusion on the social grants and the children, I want to hand over the answer to this question to Dr. Mampo Mutise.
Ed? Ed?
Thank you very much. I was wondering if the minister could give us an idea. The government will be increasing, the Treasury will be increasing in Treasury bill issuance to support its funding needs. And will the Treasury be able to provide any support to the land bank?
The third caller is Warren from Business Day.
Warren, we are all ears. Warren, I think it's the Warren I know. Warren, are you listening?
Yes, I am.
Then steam ahead.
Great. Just three questions for Minister Mboweni on the loan guarantee scheme, and what are the points that still need to be agreed upon? So, in other words, when does he expect to have it implemented? And then, given that the revenue and expenditure figures for the fiscus have changed so drastically, will the minister be presenting an emergency budget at all in the next few months? And then
But I think just on the question of the budget that you have mentioned, the minister spoke to that. Then go to your last question. Definitely the minister will present the budget. He did speak to that in his opening address. The next question is opening address. The next question.
The last question is just on the land bank, given the precarious situation it finds itself in. Could the minister give us any insight into the options that are being looked at to assist the land bank at this point? Thank you.
Thank you. So you have two questions, not three. I've answered your third one. The last caller.
The last caller is Fifi from CNBC Africa.
Fifi, we are with you. You can steam ahead.
Hi, question for Minister Mboweni. So, could you respond to views in the market that the government is taking an expensive route to fund its stimulus and that a cheaper route could be printing money? And also a follow-up question on the land bank. Are there any other state-owned enterprises at this stage that also are at risk of defaulting on their debt payments? And will National Treasury be providing assistance to them also?
Thing from you, sis.
Yes, Minister, we do. Jan de Lange from Rapport is asking, would it be possible to reverse the increase in the child support grant, the old age grant, and the COVID-19 relief grant after 6 months, or if extended after the COVID-19 disaster? And then Alex Winning from Reuters News Agency is asking, could the minister say how many billions of rands the government is looking to raise from international financial institutions such as the IMF, the World Bank, the AFDB, and the NDB for the stimulus package? How much money is government looking to raise on domestic markets in billions of rands through increased South African government bond issuance? Then Monique from CNBC Africa is asking, have we sourced any funding yet from multinational institutions, and if so, how much? Where are we with the 200 billion loan guarantee scheme? Has it been launched yet? Shall I continue? Should we stop here?
No, I think let's stop there so that we are not all confused. When you are ready, Minister. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Tembo. I know that when I was a student at university, I would have a question ready for my lecturer the following day before the lecturer started speaking. Poor lecturer will explain the subject matter at length. at the end of which I will still ask the question which has been answered in the lecture, because I had put it in my head that I must ask this question. So the issue about sourcing international funding, I answered that. So I don't want you to do what I used to do to my lecturers. I've answered that question. By how much is the Treasury going to increase its weekly issuance of Treasury bills? It's a technical matter that the Treasury deals with on a weekly basis. So I'm not in a position to stand here and say it's going to be X amount every week. They have to do what they need to do technically based on the market conditions. As far as the loan guarantee scheme, my understanding is that this scheme is ready to be launched next week, and it will go for a foreseeable period ahead. So I think as soon as the lockdown is lifted, in whichever way the president explained, and as the economy begins to move, we'll see that loan guarantee scheme being utilized by those businesses, as I said, which are less than 300 million rand turnover. The issue about the printing of money, let me just say, we are not in that business. So therefore, the question hasn't really arisen in our mind, because we don't understand why, after we've provided such an the land bank has come under severe stress, and the National Treasury, particularly the Asset and Liability Management Division, the Land Bank, some of the key banks which the Land Bank has got credit facilities with, and myself have been engaged in lengthy consultations to ensure that the Land Bank is able to continue functioning. Those conversations and negotiations are going on, but one thing is for certain: the World Bank has difficulties, is in trouble, and our responsibility is to do whatever we can again to support the Land Bank. Finally, there is the issue of, I knew this was going to come out, by the way, Minister Tembu. I knew it, that somebody's going to say, you are providing this additional support in the social grant system during this difficult period. When October comes, and you have to lift these additional measures, then cannot be taken away. But that's not correct. We need to explain now, these are temporary measures, not permanent measures. And the media must not start now agitating people in the wrong direction. Because it's you in the media who are going to complicate our lives. Complica vida do povo. We don't want to complicate the lives of the people. We explain that this is a temporary measure, temporary relief to support people. In October, that will be lifted. Let's not agitate our people to do the wrong thing. And I'm quite certain that our people fully understand that and will work together with us in this situation. Finally, our approach is that growth-enhancing investments must continue. That is not a waste, because that's preparing for when the economy starts moving again. Investments in things like infrastructure spend. It might not be the full amount that we had budgeted for in February, but that infrastructure spend must continue to be in the economy. drawing in the private sector through the blended, for example, infrastructure fund that is being managed from the DBSA, and the work that is doing from within the presidency and ourselves and the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure, working together to make sure that the infrastructure spend takes place, because that's part of lifting the economy going forward. And as you know, as part of the backdrop to this conversation, is a contraction in a number of sectors in the economy, construction, and so on. So we have to very strategically make sure that the growth-enhancing measures take place. One thing that's not going to change, though, is that our focus on structural reforms must continue. We cannot stop on structural reforms. And I've spoken about this before, and we will continue to make sure that we work very strongly in structural reforms. But also, the government, I'm quite certain about this, will have to put in place labor policies which are supportive of the increased employment of South African youth without discriminating against non-South Africans. Let me give you an example. In 1990, when I returned to South Africa from exile, 8 out of 10 workers at a restaurant were South African. And 2, probably Malawi or Zimbabwe. And today, almost 100% is not. So the new economy that we're getting into after the lifting of the lockdown must answer that question. That any establishment wanting to reopen, must have a new labor market policy which prioritizes South Africans, but does not discriminate against Zimbabwean or Malawians. But the proportion of South Africans working in a restaurant must be greater than that of non-South Africans. That's a new economy that we're talking about. In the agricultural sector, similarly, and people who want to approach banks or government for funding and so on must demonstrate that they do have a labor market and employment policy that favors South Africans. Nothing xenophobic about that. And still open space for every spaza shop must be registered with a license to operate. And more importantly for me, by the way, Minister Mthembu, must have a bank account. Must have a bank account. And a tax number. And must open the business for inspection by the Department of Health, so that our people are not being fed expired goods and so on. So it's going to be a new way of doing things, and I think we stand ready, Minister Mthembu, to play our part as the Minister of Finance, together with my colleagues from the National Treasury, SARS, and other institutions which are part of the Ministry of Finance family. I need to offer Dr. Masondo's apology that he was not able to be with us due to prior commitments, but he would have loved to be with us. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much.
We have taken, as we always do, 2 rounds of questions. If there are any questions, as we always do, we will send them to the minister, because he also has to rush. We also have to rush. There's another meeting that I must go to. So to the colleagues who have sent in questions, I know we did the same the last time we had this type of interaction. So all your questions will be sent to the relevant, to Treasury this time. We only have one department, by the way. We don't have many. So that's what we will do. As we close, again, if we can remind all sectors in our country and all our people that tomorrow at 10, tune in, because that's when we'll be putting before South Africa the risk-adjusted approach to ensuring that there is economic activity after the lockdown. So if all of us can then be ready for tomorrow. The other questions that will then be answered on how do we use the monies that the minister spoke to are questions that will be answered next week by the relevant departments on how do we use all these monies and ensure that indeed they get to the necessary people who need them. With those words, we would like once again to thank you. But again, just one thing, for the media, don't pick up anything that you pick from the street. If there is any information, we will give you the information. Don't be too excited with leaks, because leaks might be a document that we're still consulting on, that we have not concluded on as government. So on documents that we have concluded on, we will come back to the South African public and say, here is an approach, what do you say? Particularly as it relates to the risk adjustment approach to easing in economic activity after the lockdown. With those words said, I would like to thank the minister and your team. Thank you very much for explaining to our people how Treasury has approached these matters that you spoke to. And again, to all people at home, let's continue doing what we are doing. Staying at home is the only way of beating this virus. It has, throughout the world, in our country, it has already killed 75 people. So if we continue to stay at home, that's the best way of fighting this virus. But secondly, if we can continue with social distancing, if we can continue with washing our hands, these are the only precautions we have, and ensure that we don't touch anybody or greet anybody by hand, but use our elbows to greet people. Having said that, to all South Africans, thank you very much. We are in this together. We can only fight this invisible enemy together. So far, we have done well. Let's continue doing our part. Thank you, and thank you very much.